If the schools or the education sector was budgeting adequately and recognizing that water, sanitation, and hygiene are key components of delivering education outcomes and therefore very important, you would imagine that they would want to budget for and make provisions for toilets, hygiene, and water in the schools. But that's not the case.
Hi everybody, welcome back.
You're listening to Washworks, a podcast from DevX about how a lack of water, sanitation and hygiene impacts the everyday lives of billions of people around the world and what can be done about it.
I'm Amruta and I'm an associate editor at DevX, and on this podcast, I do what I do best, ask questions to Rebecca.
And I'm Rebecca, reporter and senior associate with DevX, and I cover water and sanitation and hygiene out of Bangkok.
On this podcast and each episode, we've looked at WASH and one other SDG. So far, we've covered climate change, peace, gender, and health. And on this episode, our last one, we're talking education.
That's right, Sustainable Development Goal 4. And what we're asking is, how does a lack of WASH affect a child's ability to learn? And in 2021, why don't all schools have toilets and hand washing facilities? These are all things we want to know.
We want to know who is making these decisions. Who are the people on the table when it's decided that schools do not have things like taps and toilets?
Yeah, this is something we actually looked into a little bit last year, and the data showed that prior to the pandemic, 2 in 5 schools worldwide lacked basic hand washing facilities. 37% of schools didn't have a decent toilet, and 43% had nowhere for pupils to wash their hands with soap and water. So it's not just, 1 or 2 schools here and there. It really is a widespread problem.
And do you think the pandemic has changed that at all?
I mean, it's hard to say. It's definitely something that both professionals in the education space and the WASH space were advocating for. And even just after that first lockdown, when pupils were starting to go back to schools, WHO Director General Tedros did come out with a statement calling for it to be addressed so that children were going to schools where they had the utmost hygiene measures in place to stave off the virus. But yeah, someone who can maybe shed a little bit more light on whether that's changed at all over the last few years is Ada Oko-Williams. She is the Senior WASH Manager of Sanitation at WaterAid, but also the co-founder of African Women Sanitation Professionals Network.
You cannot achieve full educational outcomes without water, sanitation, and hygiene, especially at the lower levels of education, at the pre-primary, primary, and secondary levels of education. WASH is critical to attaining any educational outcomes.
And it sounds, as you say, it sounds so obvious and so critical an element to have in schools, but I know that research says that prior to the pandemic, that's 2 in 5 schools worldwide didn't have hand washing facilities, for example. What do you think the barriers are to making sure that there are those facilities in schools?
It starts with the critical line of investments, budgeting for and making available resources to ensure that proper education outcomes are achieved, and also recognizing the contribution WASH makes in that light. When you're planning for education, we're very quick to put up the classroom infrastructure. Okay, you have schools that are typically nothing else but classrooms and teachers and students. So that's all you have in terms of infrastructure. If the schools or the education sector was budgeting adequately and recognizing that water, sanitation, and hygiene are key components of delivering education outcomes and therefore very important, you would imagine that they would want to budget for and make provisions for toilets, hygiene, and water in the schools. But that's not the case. So for me, that's a critical factor that needs to be addressed.
So if budgets is one of the biggest issue, obviously access to more finance sounds like a great solution. But is there first of all access to more financing for this, or is it just a case of that the schools need to better prioritize the money that they've already got?
From a multi-country evaluation that we did for our programs across East Africa some few years back, one of the things we realized is, and why the emphasis is also on budgeting, especially from the education sector, is that there isn't even enough to take care of the formal education provision in the schools in terms of per capita what some countries were budgeting for a child's education. For example, I think at the time in Uganda, they were getting about 4 shillings per child for managing the school. And how much can 4 shillings go per month per child in terms of a provision of access to even the learning, the teaching, and the classroom activity, let alone the supporting infrastructure and services that are supposed to bring about this holistic education. So that's why I think a critical part is financing and investment that needs to increase, and increase especially also for WASH because of the attendant benefit that it brings.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we've kind of been in the midst of a pandemic for the last year and a half, and children across the world have started to go back to school. Do you think COVID-19 has put that kind of need for budgeting right now and the need for more financing, the urgency, has it highlighted the urgency of addressing this issue?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I think so. And then I work in, currently my colleagues in Mozambique. Last year, the government of Mozambique committed some significant amount of resources to providing water in schools across its primary and secondary schools in the country. And that was fantastic initiative. But that also came on the heels of, the pandemic. But we're working with them to support the government of Mozambique to really use that investment beyond just putting physical infrastructure on ground. They are great. Access to water is really, really important in terms of reducing the risk of infection of not just COVID, but other, diseases that come along at this time.
I know that Dr. Tedros at the WHO had called on governments to make the implementation of WASH services in schools a key part of strategies around COVID and the operation of reopening schools. And aside from Mozambique, are you confident that that's going to happen? Are you already seeing that happening, or are you worried that that's perhaps not going to be enough?
To be honest and straightforward, it's not enough. But we're very happy that like the government of Mozambique is demonstrating that leadership in terms of increasing its investment and focus on schools settings during this pandemic in response to, of course, the call by WHO. So that's kind of like a flagship. We're watching the space and supporting the space as much as possible. But that alone, the government's investment alone is not going to cut it. We'll need more investment from other actors, to support Mozambique. Whatever they've put in place will not be able to cover the entire country to the extent that every child, in school or out of school have access to WASH facilities. It's not enough. There's still room for more to be done. And really using this opportunity to call on other governments to explore this some more. Reduce your military spending, for instance, and put that into education, and also work more collaboratively. Let the responsible ministries take full responsibility for them. The school setting is where it's an it brings about an intersectionality of different sectors, really. It's different sectors come to play, and that's important that all of the participating sector in the school environment are budgeting, are actively understanding the role that WASH plays in delivering education outcomes. So, for example, the Ministry of Youth and Social Development it should understand that it's critical that WASH considerations are considered in schools. Otherwise, how do you achieve youth development outcomes?
Absolutely. And what kind of other recommendations would you have for those working in the development sector, perhaps the WASH space specifically, about how they can help ensure that schools really are factoring in these really vital facilities?
Okay, so I would start with, first of all, asking that we also take that responsibility, that wherever we work as development support agencies or actors, that we're sure that we're delivering, working comprehensively, looking at the big picture and not just going in to do, I'm a WASH specialist, and so I just go in and I'm just attacking the matter of WASH. Because for education, the issues are very, very linked. There's a lot of intersectionality around delivering education. And that intersectionality brings me to an example, which also is a personal, that resonates with me personally. So it's the project we have in India. I think it's in Madhya Pradesh, the state of Madhya Pradesh, where we're working in partnership with UNICEF. And this project, it's across 500 schools. So we're working within these schools to provide water, sanitation, hygiene. But then the approach we're taking is beyond just the infrastructure. It's teaching also, or training these young people to be able to operate, maintain, and manage their water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. You know what? That provides another whole level of education, which is beyond the regular one set in the curriculum. It's offering life skills. They're able to do minor repairs themselves. In terms of menstrual hygiene, they have access to information. They have access to, absorbent materials, sanitary towels, really. So basically, thinking beyond just the facility you drop, but let the child in the school, the young woman in the school, be the center, or the young boy in the school be the center of whatever you're designing and how you are delivering. I went to a school like that, run by Catholic nuns. And we were an all-girls school, but we had to do all of that. Now it resonates when I'm in this role, and kind of gave me the confidence to be able to handle some of the more mechanical things that people would think only boys do, or only boys can do, like handle a spanner, the hand pump is not pumping that morning, sister comes along and everyone gets to work on it. So I know the benefit of that firsthand.
That was so interesting, and it's still bizarre to me that there is not a budget for WASH in schools. And to think that schools can still be built today and no one has thought about adding a toilet and what it might cost is something that, doesn't quite fit into the fact that we're so clued into, both education and WASH in the general development sense.
I know it was kind of almost forgivable when you thought, oh, well, maybe these were schools built hundreds of years ago and there's just not money to kind of add on an extension. But the fact that today schools are being built and no one's factoring in, well, where do we add such facilities is just kind of mind-boggling. So yeah, that's a great first step that ministries can make, just simply putting money aside for it at that top level. And surely when they hear all of the negative impacts that can come about from just not having somewhere to wash your hands, somewhere to go to the toilet, surely that's enough to kind of incite some action.
Yes, absolutely. And particularly for girls, right? We talked about this in our episode on WASH and gender, about how the lack of facilities has a disproportionate impact on girls, and especially girls of the school-going age. And now that I think about it, I feel like it must be harder for people in the rural areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's an organization, they're called the Development Organization of the Rural Poor, and they're an NGO in Bangladesh, and they specifically work with people from low-income contexts, and that might be people living in a rural area, but also women, children, excluded communities, to improve their socioeconomic conditions.
Right, and is WASH in schools part of their work?
Yeah, they have lots of other activities that kind of come under their mandate, but WASH in schools is a big part of what they do. And so we were joined by Mohammad, Zobair, Hasan, the chief of DORP, just to tell us a little bit more about the challenges that there are in trying to implement WASH facilities at a local level. Obviously, we've just heard from Ada about the challenges at that higher top level, but what are organizations like DORP doing to improve access to washing facilities, and what are the barriers that they're coming up against?
Mostly in our country, water facilities, apart from urban areas, mainly depends on the water points, that hand pumps. And hand pumps are mainly located in the school premises, and most of the schools have only one hand pump. If the hand pumps are available, then it also issue of the accessibility of the students, because one hand pump are not covering the all students equally. So the school management committee, as well as the guardians of the schools, and also the related authority who are service provider on behalf of the government to the schools, they need to be discussed and work together to plan a school wash systems, water sanitation hygiene system. That is very important. So under this school wash, already Ministry of Education, Ministry of Local Government, and Ministry of Planning working together at the central level of the country. So hopefully by this 2030, we are expecting that this water sanitation hygiene in schools will be covered very soon.
Great, thank you. And talk to me a little bit about what DORP, your organization's role, is in encouraging this collaboration and helping schools to make sure that they've got access to wash facilities.
We tried to facilitate these three conditions at the school levels so that schools can realize their bottlenecks and their gaps and their commitment in relation to the improvement of water sanitation and hygiene at school. For example, in South Belt of Bangladesh, we have addressed 30 schools altogether, and we have tried to engage the school management committee, local government, which call Union Porishad, which is the lowest tier of the local government systems, then public health engineering department, which is the one of the service providers of the country for rural water sanitation hygiene, and the guardian, so that these multi-stakeholders, including the duty bearers and right holders, sit together and discuss each of the school's problem. And we have seen that there are 5 aspects they have discussed, and those 5 aspects mainly related to the quality of sanitation facilities, menstrual hygiene management, building of additional toilets, gender and inclusion, and broader participation, including awareness raising among the community as well as the students, and lastly but not least, that's allocation of budget for the whole process. And we have found that menstrual hygiene management is not properly addressed at those schools, because during the menstrual period of the students, girl students, they don't willing to go to the school at the particular time due to the not having the proper water and sanitation facilities. So this is one of the important aspects we have found, that MHM friendly toilets is very important to establish at the school level, for which a proper budget allocation is important, and mostly from the local government support as well as the Department of Public Health Engineering. And we have also found that gender and inclusion issue is also very much important to realize by the school management committee. So that's why we are providing a lot of campaign support, tools, introduction, training to the school management committee, students, and also the local government. And in that case, we have also tried to engage the media personnel at the local level, so that this can be shared with other people. It should be open to all. It should be transparent, and sharing level must be very high at the school to the decision making level. At the initial stage, there are a lot of challenges to introduce these integrity aspects at the school level, but over the last 2-3 years, we have seen the school management committee and the local government had realized that integrity issues are really important to having a sustainable school wash system.
Through those actions, have you seen any successes yet?
Already we have seen that in each schools have allocated separate wash budget. And secondly, we have also seen that in each of the schools, there are adequate hand washing facilities have been established, toilet cleaning solutions. And third result, we have seen that now school management committee are sitting with the local government as well as the guardians of the students quarterly basis or sometimes bi-monthly basis to discuss about the progress of the school wash as well as the report sharing, that how much they have allocated and how much they have spent, etc.
And what would be some of the key lessons that you've learned through your time in working with schools and with local government to improve wash in education facilities?
Well, according to our findings or what we have seen in the ground, the service providers for the schools are not well connected. So this is very important, that who is responsible for the school wash facilities, that should be very clear among the service providers as well as the service recipient. In this case, service recipient is the schools. So we have seen that regular discussion among the service providers and service recipients is important to overcome this type of problem. This is one. Secondly, definitely there should have a budget for water, sanitation, hygiene.
Perfect, thank you. And finally, would you have a call to action for the development community around WASH and access to it in schools?
Yes, I think from my experience and also what we have seen, that participatory discussion is very important. The local level schools actually need the systematic approach, and this systematic approach only can be developed or only can be established if the local service providers, for example, Department of Public Health Engineering, Union Porishod, Upazila Porishod, and also the schools sit together and respond to each other. And in that case, international development community can focus on the mutual accountability issues and also focus on mobilization of the civil society in the whole process.
Wow, we keep coming back to this again and again, and the resounding message that I got even from this interview, that there is a need for budgeting and there's a disproportionate impact on the lack of facilities in schools on girls. And the fact that the ministries are just not talking to each other.
Absolutely, and it's not just budgeting for new facilities, but it's actually investing in the maintenance of the existing ones. It sounds like there's a real issue with poor quality facilities that are kind of just falling apart because they're old and no one's been maintaining them, as well as obviously this massive issue that in some places there just isn't any facilities at all.
Yeah, and it was great that Mohammad could share more on how to go about actually changing this. So engaging media to raise awareness on the issue is definitely one. Having school committees talking to students and their parents and guardians is another. And that brings us to an issue that we've talked about on this podcast so much, and that is of including communities while designing programs and going and talking to them about what they want and what their needs are and how to actually incorporate those in the design of it.
Yeah, as you said, it's something that's come up in all of our conversations, and I think what a continuous theme has been this lack of awareness. And surely when you break it down and you say to people, there are schools that don't have toilets, if people could put themselves in the position of those children and imagine going to work for 8 hours and not having access to a toilet, you'd think that would be enough to spark some action. So hopefully through this podcast we've been able to shine a bit of a light on how WASH does intersect with all of these big issues, and just a simple intervention at that level will surely have multiple gains across the whole sustainable development agenda.
Yes, absolutely. That is our hope, that, in the last 5 episodes where we've tackled, different areas of development and their connection with WASH, the idea that WASH is not this forgotten thing and it has such a big impact on the big questions of our day and the big problems that we're trying to solve today, sort of gets highlighted in its own little way.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that we're going to be continuing to cover at DevX. Obviously, we have our Washworks series that's ongoing for a little bit longer, so do feel free to check that out at washworks.devx.com to go back and listen to our other episodes if you haven't already. And always feel free to reach out to DevX if you have anything that you think that we should be covering in terms of wash. It remains a really important topic for us.
And thank you all so much for listening to Washworks. We hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we did creating it. And that's goodbye from me and Rebecca for now, but do stay tuned for more news about new podcasts from DevX.